Hello. That was not the usual kind of music that I play during the opening countdown, but that was a recording of the people gathered in Mount Meron in Israel last night for Lag BaOmer when this terrible tragedy happened. This was before the tragedy, when that gathering, I mean, it was so beautiful. You see these clips. There were 100,000 people there. They've had much more in the past. They've had 400,000 people gather for Lag BaOmer in Meron, and nothing happened. Nothing went wrong. There's already a chatter today online and in the WhatsApp groups, blaming people for what happened last night. Way too soon. We don't know what happened. We don't know why. We certainly don't know why it happened. It's not the time to be blaming people or even to be finding meaning. It's a time to mourn. But what I will say is that song that they were singing, 100,000 strong, it was such a beautiful moment. Ani Mamin, they were singing. That's the 12th of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. They were singing. A few hours before that terrible crush that took 45 lives and injured many others. In our mourning for the dead, let us not forget that there are people in need of healing right now. We're going to recite a psalm for their healing in a moment. But this song that they were singing shortly before the tragedy, they were saying, I believe with a perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach. And though he may delay, I wait daily, longing for his arrival. And we say Amen. On behalf of the people who were injured in that crush and who need healing right now, may they have a complete and speedy recovery. And I'll read Psalm 20 for their healing. For the chief musician, a psalm of David. May the Lord answer you in a time of distress. May the name of Jacob's God be a tower of strength to you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and give you support from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and graciously accept your burnt offerings. Selah. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill your every plan. May we shout for joy over your victory. And in the name of our God, unfurl our banners. May the Lord grant your every request. Now I know that the Lord will give victory to his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some boast of chariots and some of horses, but we boast in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand firm. Lord, grant victory. May the King answer us on the day we call. Adonai Hoshea, Hamelech, Yonenu, Beyom Korenu. We say Amen. We welcome today to the show Tom Beck, also brokenhearted, Bill, who was praying, Gwen, Rochelle, Guy, Stephen, Sharon. Oh, Sharon, you're friends with Sam Glazer, and so am I. And thank God he's all right. And Sharon says, yeah, my dear friend Sam Glazer was at the festival in Mount Meron along with his brother, Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer, and their families. He is fine. But his niece's husband was injured. It is so disturbing. May he have a complete healing. Paula and Sharon and Paula and Christo and Anne Marie and Howard and Janice. Welcome everybody to the show. And Lynn in North Texas, welcome. Okay, we dedicate today's learning. For those who are ill, we recite Psalms. For those who have passed, we learn Mishnayos. Right? That's the appropriate thing to do at a Shiva. They can no longer learn in this world, so we learn on their behalf, and we dedicate our learning to them, and that's a merit to them in the world to come, and it takes them higher in their journey in the world of souls. And I'll tell you, if we were going to dedicate a day of learning to people in the next world, today's a beautiful page to dedicate. It's a very rich daf, and we like to learn Mishnayos, plural. And today, it's rare, right? We spent 2 weeks learning the first Mishnah here in chapter 1 of Tractate Yoma, but today we will have 2 Mishnahs, Mishnahs 4 and 5 here in chapter 1. We are on Daf Yud Tes, page 19 in Tractate Yoma, the 6th volume of the Talmud. We are studying the laws of Yom Kippur, and specifically the preparation of the high priest as he prepares for the whole week prior to Yom Kippur. Here's the 4th Mishnah of chapter 1. The elders of the court who read the order of the service, the elders of the court who read the order of the service of the day before, the high priest, no, before meaning in front of. Okay, so the elders of the court who read the order of the service of the day before the high priest passed him to the elders of the priesthood. So they're preparing the high priest for his duties on Yom Kippur for 1 whole week. And it's the elders who do the preparation, those with the most experience. But we have 2 sets of elders. There's the elders of the court. They are not necessarily priests. These are the sages of the Sanhedrin. And we have the elders of the priesthood, the most experienced priests who are the most familiar with the obligations of the high priest on Yom Kippur. So the elders of the court who read before the high priest what exactly he needs to do, they pass him to the elders of the priesthood. And they, meaning the elders of the priesthood, took him up to the house of Avtinas. And they administered, and why? Yeah? Candle. Oh, thank you. Let's light up the darkness. Definitely off my game. It's an unspeakable, inexplicable tragedy. What happened last night? We can't make sense of it. It's too soon to even look for meaning in it. At any rate, okay. So the elders of the court, who are the most versed, right, in the Torah obligations of the priest, even more than the priests, in the sense that they are the sages who study this. But they can't enter certain areas of the temple, so they have to pass the high priest over to the elders of the priesthood, who can, show him specifically things to do and take him to places in the temple complex where non-priests cannot go. So the elders of the priesthood take the high priest up to the house of Avtinas. Now we've seen this name before. Avtinas, this was the family entrusted with compounding and grinding and preparing the incense. There's a daily incense offering every day of the year. But for the incense offering of Yom Kippur, and particularly the incense offering that the high priest is going to take with him into the Holy of Holies and fill that room up with this beautiful cloud of incense smoke, which God says in the Torah, if that's not there, the priest will die, right? Bring that incense in here so that you do not die. They grind it extra fine. It's a particular preparation that only is received by the incense of Yom Kippur. So they take the high priest to the house of Avtinas, and they administered him an oath, and took leave of him, and went on their way. When they administered this oath, they said to him, "My master, high priest, we are agents of the court, and you are our agent and the agent of the court. We administer an oath to you in the name of him who housed his name in this house, right? So God, who housed his name in this house, the Holy Temple, that you will not change even one matter from all that we have said to you with regard to the burning of the incense or any other service that you will perform when you are alone. After this oath, he would leave them and cry, and they would leave him and cry. He would cry because they suspected him of having Sadducee tendencies, and they would cry that it was necessary to administer this oath because they needed to be suspicious, because there were high priests who had these Sadducee tendencies in the late Second Temple period who were trying to undermine the tradition as received and goes all the way back to Moses. They thought they knew better. And so this oath became necessary. But those who administered the oath cried, and the high priest who took the oath cried that this oath was necessary. They kept him occupied throughout the night to prevent him from sleeping. Now, yesterday, I think I misspoke. The night that they keep him up all night is Yom Kippur night. I don't think they kept him up all night the night before the night of Yom Kippur. Okay, so we administer a note to you in the name of him who housed his name in this house. I'm sorry. And they kept him occupied throughout the night to prevent him from sleeping. If he was a scholar, he would teach Torah. If he was not a scholar, Torah scholars would teach Torah before him. And if he was accustomed to read the Bible, he would read. And if he was not, they would read the Bible before him. And what books would they read before him to pique his interest so that he would not fall asleep? Right? So this is a great question. Which are considered the most edge of your seat books in the Bible? The ones where if you're only going to read the Bible and you want to make sure that you stay up all night, which are going to be the most gripping books of the Bible? They would read from Job and from Ezra and from Chronicles. Zechariah, the son of Kevutal, says, many times I read before him from the book of Daniel. So those are considered the most gripping books in the Bible. Job, Ezra, Chronicles, and Daniel. That's the Mishnah. Gemara. Now we're at the top of page 19a. Atana taught, sage of the Mishnah, the sages took the high priest to the house of Avtinas, where the incense was prepared, to teach him the method of taking handfuls of incense, which is a difficult and complex skill. It really is, because when the high priest enters the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, he has to have two hands cupped like this, filled with incense, right? And a ladle of burning hot coals. Where's he going to carry that? So the ladle is hanging down from his two hands. We'll be covering this at another point, but it's got the glowing hot coals inside and the incense up here. And then he's got to get inside with this stuff, this whole setup, and then get the incense down onto the coals, and it makes the smoke. And he has to do that inside the Holy of Holies, not outside the Holy of Holies, as we shall see. Rav Papa said the high priest had two chambers. One was the Parhedron chamber, where he's housed for the 7 days, and one was the chamber of the house of Avtinas. One of them was in the north of the courtyard, and one was in the south. The Gemara explains, one was in the north. As we learned in the Mishnah, there were 6 chambers in the Israelite courtyard, 3 in the north and 3 in the south. And as we saw when we had the diagram, the Israelite courtyard is actually a very narrow courtyard, but everything was on a large scale, so enough people fit in there, but it was much smaller than the women's courtyard. So it's almost like a strip between the courtyard of the priests, where they would actually slaughter and bring the offerings to the altar, and between the women's courtyard, where other people could, where women and people could come and get to a certain distance up to that gate with the circular steps that descended from it. And the Israelite courtyard is in between. It's a narrow courtyard. But about that, in Israelite Courtyard, there were 6 chambers there, 3 in the north and 3 in the south, right? So remember, when you're facing the western wall, right? When you're facing that wall, you're facing east. The temple is actually to your left, up on the Temple Mount. Where the temple was is to your left when you're standing at the western wall now. But nevertheless, in terms of direction, right, you're facing east. And north is to your left, right? So where that Israelite Courtyard is, it runs north-south, and there's 3 chambers at the north end and 3 at the south end. The chambers in the south were, so closer to where we stand now at the western wall, the chambers in the south were the chambers of the salt, the chamber of the parva, and the chamber of the rinsers, those who rinse. The Gemara explains the function performed in each chamber. The chamber of the salt was where priests would place the salt for the offering in storage. The chamber of the parva meaning the hides. This is where there were offerings and that the hides would be taken from the animals that would go up in smoke on the altar. The hides were given to the priests. And this is the room where they salted and consecrated the hides that belonged to the priests to prevent them from spoiling. And on the roof of that chamber was the hall of the immersion of the high priest for Yom Kippur. And the chamber of the rinsers was where they would rinse the innards of consecrated animals, which were not taken up to the altar while dirty or with undigested food remaining in them. From there, a circular staircase ascended to the roof of the chamber of the hides. The 3 chambers in the north of the courtyard were the chamber of the wood, the chamber of the exile, and the chamber of hewn stone. With regard to the chamber of the wood, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who is the Tana of the Mishnayos in Tractate Midot, in which this Mishnah appears, said, I forgot what purpose that chamber would serve. Abba Shaul says the high priest's chamber was behind the 2 chambers, the chamber of the exile and the chamber of the hewn stone, and the roofs of all 3 were level. As the 3 were attached, they shared a roof. Hold on. About this chamber of the hewn stone, several suggestions were raised to explain the name of this chamber. Some commentaries explain that the chamber was constructed of hewn and dressed stones, although no iron tools were permitted in the temple. It was permitted to chisel stones outside the temple and use them in the temple. The only exception was stones for the altars. Others explain that this chamber was unique in that it was closed, and its name, Gazit, is from a Hebrew root meaning cut. The chamber was cut in that it was separated from its surroundings. Alternatively, it may refer to the priests who were disqualified and cut from the roster of active priests by the Sanhedrin that convened there. The Chamber of Hewn Stone is where the Sanhedrin met when the Sanhedrin met in the temple complex. In the chamber of the exile, there was the well excavated by those returning from exile, for which the chamber was named, and the wheel with which water was drawn was positioned over it. And from there, they would supply water for use in the entire temple courtyard for washing and rinsing. In the chamber of hewn stone, there the great Sanhedrin of Israel convened and judged whether the priests were fit for service. Right? So we see that the sages had had religious authority over the priests. The priests were entrusted to bring offerings and do everything that the nation needed in terms of the offerings, the daily offerings, the incense offerings, sin and guilt offerings when those were brought, peace offerings, thanksgiving offerings, burnt offerings, etc. All of that was done by the priests. But in terms of the sacred life of the nation and of the people, and even of the actions of the priests themselves, the Sanhedrin, meaning the leading sages of each generation who were part of the Sanhedrin, they held authority even over the priests. They wouldn't issue rabbinic decrees in the temple because the sages knew well enough they didn't need additional rabbinic decrees to keep them from coming to transgress Torah laws, but nevertheless, the sages, meaning the Pharisees, had authority over the priests. And so the Sanhedrin of Israel convened in the Chamber of Hewn Stone and judged whether the priests were fit for service. A priest in whom a disqualification was detected, either due to a physical blemish or in his lineage, that something was wrong. They traced his lineage, who was his father and his father and his father and his mother and her mother and her mother, etc. If there was an issue with his lineage, then he would be disqualified, and he would wear black. And he would wrap himself in black in a display of sorrow and mourning, and would emerge from the temple and go on his way because he was disqualified for service as a priest. And any priest in whom a disqualification was not found would wear white when he emerged from, his grilling, as it were, before the Sanhedrin prior to entering into the service of the priesthood. And so if there was no disqualification found, he would wear white and wrap himself in white in a display of joy, and would enter and serve with his fellow priests. In any event, it was taught that there was a chamber of the high priest in the north of the courtyard, and there is proof that he also had had another chamber in the south of the courtyard. As we learned in the Mishna, 7 gates were in the temple courtyard, 3 in the north and 3 in the south, and 1 in the east. The gates in the south were the gate of fire, and second to it was the gate of the offering, and third to it was the gate of the water. And the gate that was in the east was called the gate of Nicanor, and 2 chambers were there next to the gate of Nicanor, 1 to its right and 1 to its left. One was the chamber of Pinchas the dresser, where the priestly vestments were stored, and one was the chamber of the preparers of the griddle cake offering, where the daily griddle cake offering was prepared on behalf of the high priest. The high priest would bring a daily offering in the temple, this daily griddle cake, and this is the chamber where it was prepared. The gates that were in the north, the first was the gate of the spark, which was a portico building, meaning it had a roof but was not completely closed on every side. And there was a second story built atop it. And there was the honor guard of the temple, and there the honor guard of the temple stood, with the priests guarding from above and the Levites from below. Inside of this gate was the rampart, and an opening led from the gate to the rampart. Second to this gate was the gate of the offering. Third to it was the gate of the hall of the hearth. And it was taught in a baraisa. The high priest would perform 5 immersions and 10 sanctifications of his hands and feet on the day of Yom Kippur. 5 times he would immerse in the mikveh, in the waters of purification, full immersion, and purify himself. And 10 times he would wash his hands as a purification, all on the day of Yom Kippur. And he was trained in all these practices that he would have to do on Yom Kippur during that week of sequestering before. And each of these immersions and hand washings was performed in the sacred area of the courtyard, on the roof of the hall of the parva, except for the first immersion, which was performed in the non-sacred area outside the courtyard. The first immersion of the day was not unique to Yom Kippur, but was performed every day by any priest entering the temple. And that immersion was performed on the roof of the gate of the water, and that gate was alongside his chamber. So apparently the high priest had a chamber next to the gate of the water, which was in the south of the courtyard. So this was all as a proof that the high priest, during the days of his sequestering in the temple complex, in the week before Yom Kippur, that he had 2 rooms at his disposal, right? The chamber of the Parhedrin and this other chamber, right? One in the north and one in the south. So the high priest, had the use of 2 chambers, but we do not know whether the Parhedrin chamber was in the north and the chamber of the house of Avtinas was in the south, or the chamber of the house of Avtinas was in the north and the Parhedrin chamber was in the south. And however, it is reasonable to say that the Parhedrin chamber was in the south and the high priest slept there. So they discuss a little bit more the geography of where his sleeping chamber was likely to be. We're going to skip down just a little bit. It was taught in the Mishnah that the elders said to him, "My master, high priest, we are agents of the court, and you are our agent, and the agent of the court." The Gemara suggests, well, let us say that this statement that you are our agent and the agent of the court is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua. As Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said, these priests who sacrifice the offerings are the agents of the merciful one. They are not agents representing the Jewish people, but they are agents representing God, as he commanded them to perform the service. And proof is cited for this opinion, as if you say that they are our agents, is there any matter that we are unable to perform and our agents are able to perform? How can we send somebody as our agent to do something that we ourselves cannot do? Now, some might say, that's exactly why you send an agent, to do something that you cannot do. But that's not what Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says. He says the role of the agent is to perform a task on behalf of the one who commissioned him. And the agent cannot perform a task that the one who commissioned him is unable to perform. Since it is prohibited for Israelites to enter the priest's courtyard and to perform the sacrificial rites, clearly the priests are not agents representing the Israelites. The language of the Mishna, in which the court elders address the high priest and say that he is their agent, apparently contradicts that understanding. So since they did say it, it would seem that Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, lost that argument, and the high priest is acting as an agent of the Jewish people, rather than, as Rav Huna says, an agent of the Holy One who commanded them to bring these offerings. And the Gemara answers, this is what they say to him. We administer an oath to you according to our understanding and the understanding of the court, cautioning him that he cannot rationalize violating the oath by claiming that he took the oath based on his own interpretation. He is bound by the understanding of the court. The Mishnah does not address the nature of the high priest's agency, right? So we don't get an answer when the high priest or any priest is serving in the temple. Are they acting as an agent of the Jewish people or as an agent of the Lord? That question is left open. Based on this puzzle of, can they do something that we ourselves could not do? Since only priests can enter there, we cannot enter there. How can they be our agent? We're going to leave that question alone. What they were saying to the high priest is, the way that we understand the laws of the Torah is the way that you are going to conduct yourself as a high priest according to our inherited tradition of understanding the Torah. Meaning, you're not going to act like one of these Sadducees who say, we only believe in the written Torah. If we can't understand it from the written Torah, it doesn't bind us, right? That's nonsense. The oral Torah was given alongside the written Torah at Mount Sinai. We have at this time in history a 1,200-year tradition extending all the way back to Mount Sinai. And you are going to conduct yourself according to the law as we have received it. That's what they said to the high priest. The Mishnah continues. After this oath, he would leave them and cry, and they would leave him and cry. And the Gemara explains, he turned aside and cried due to the indignity that they suspected him of being a Sadducee. And they turned aside and cried, as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, one who suspects the innocent of indiscretion is afflicted in his body. The high priest might in fact be beyond reproach, and they may have suspected him falsely. Now, it's their job as the Sanhedrin, right, and the elders with authority, that they have to administer this oath as a matter of precaution, right? They have to do that. But it makes them cry that they're in a situation where that became necessary. That was never necessary in the first temple period. All the high priests were completely beyond reproach and they would never have to extract an oath from them. However, this teaching, I was going to, had we not had the tragedy in Meron last night, this would have been the title of today's show. One who suspects the innocent is afflicted in his body, right? Rav Steinsaltz adds as an elucidation, one who suspects the innocent of an indiscretion is afflicted in his body. We cannot be quick. We must exercise extreme caution when we direct our suspicions at other people. Right? We're always looking for explanations. We're always ready to tear down heroes. We're always ready to tear down people in authority. We're always ready to tear down our neighbors. As soon as there's a reason to suspect them of anything, people just jump on that bandwagon to suspect people who may well be innocent. That is not only an unholy, unrighteous, inappropriate behavior, but, according to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, one who is quick to suspect others will eventually be afflicted in his body. You will make yourself sick suspecting others if they happen to be innocent. So let that be a lesson that sinks into us and we take home today. Continue. And the Gemara asks, and why were the elders so insistent that the high priest take an oath? And the Gemara explains, so that he would not prepare the incense and light it outside the sanctuary, light it outside the Holy of Holies in the sanctuary before entering the Holy of Holies, and bring the coal pan with the incense already burning on it into the Holy of Holies in the manner of the Sadducees, what they said to do. Since the high priest is alone inside the sanctuary, and there is no way to ascertain whether he is in fact performing the service in the proper manner, the elders insisted that he take an oath to perform it according to their instructions. And here's the story that we mentioned last week, because it was appropriate to last week's Torah portion, and here it actually is on our daf today. The sages taught in the Tosefta there was an incident involving a certain Sadducee who was appointed high priest. They didn't know he was a Sadducee. And he prepared the incense outside the Holy of Holies and then brought it inside the Holy of Holies. Upon his emergence, he was overjoyed that he had succeeded. The father of that Sadducee met him and said to him, "My son, although we are Sadducees, and you perform the servants in accordance with our opinion, we fear the Pharisees and do not actually implement that procedure in practice." The son said to his father, "All my days I have been troubled over this verse. Leviticus 16:2, for I will appear in the cloud above the ark cover." And the Sadducees interpreted this verse to mean that God will appear above the ark cover, i.e., will enter the Holy of Holies only after the incense cloud is already there. I said, when will the opportunity become available to me? And I will fulfill it according to the Sadducee interpretation. And now that the opportunity has become available to me, will I not fulfill it? The sages said, not even a few days passed until he died and was laid out in the garbage dump, and worms were coming out of his nose in punishment for his actions. Worms coming out of his nose because his actions had to do with the incense that comes in through the nose. The incense, by the way, according to the sages, the sense of smell is actually the most sacred of our senses. It is the only sense that is untinged with the sin of the forbidden fruit of Adam and Eve. If you go back to the Adam and Eve story, it talks about, that Eve saw the fruit and she heard from the serpent and she touched the fruit and she tasted the fruit, but she never smelled the fruit, and neither did Adam, right? So the sense of smell has sort of like the most direct connection to the realm of the holy, right? And that's why the incense was so important, and the grinding of it, and the proper preparation of it, and the holiness of bringing the incense offering every day. And when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, what did he bring with him? What was the actual offering that he brought with him? The incense offering, right? So a delight to the sense of smell. And so his sin had to do with the incense, And so that measure for measure punishment, that when he died, those worms were coming out of his nose just a few days later. And some say that he was struck as soon as he emerged from the Holy of Holies. As Rabbi Chia taught, a type of sound was heard in the temple courtyard as an angel came and struck him in the face. And his fellow priests came in to remove him from there, and they found the likeness of a footprint of a calf between his shoulders. And that is the mark left by an angel striking, as it is stated with regard to angels in Ezekiel 1:7, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. So when you're killed by an angel, it leaves the footprint of a calf on you. It was taught in the Mishna that Rabbi Zechariah ben Kevutal says, "Many times I read before the high priest from the book of Daniel," right, when they were trying to keep him up all night on the night of Yom Kippur. And Rav Hanan bar Rava taught this to Chiya bar Rav before Rav in the following manner. Rabbi Zechariah bar Kevutal said, Kevutal, not Kevutal. Kevutal with an F rather than Kevutal with a V, right? Or, in a different pronunciation. And Rabbi Zechariah taught it with this F sound, that the name should be pronounced. Rabbi Zechariah bar Kevutal said, and Rav demonstrated with his hand that the name should be pronounced Kevutal with a V sound. And the Gemara asks, why did Rav demonstrate his point with a gesture? Let him simply say how it should be pronounced. And the Gemara answers, Rav was reciting Shema at that moment, right? So he was praying, he was saying Shema. He heard these people, having a Talmudic argument nearby, and when they pronounced the name wrong, he signaled that they said it wrong, and he must have, signed the Vav. It's pronounced with a Vav, not a vet, right? With a vet rather than with a pay, right? With a fe. Okay, and so the Gemara asks, and is interpreting it, and the Gemara asks, so Rav didn't interrupt his recitation of the daily Shema prayer to correct their pronunciation of this man, Rabbi Zechariah bar Kevutal, not Kefutal, right? And the Gemara asks, and is interrupting in the manner of that sort by gesturing permitted during Shema? Didn't Rabbi Yitzhak bar Shmuel bar Marta say, one who is reciting the Shema should neither make allusions with his eyes, nor open and close his mouth with his lips to convey a message, nor gesture with his fingers? We know that you're not going to interrupt your Shema and talk to somebody, but you shouldn't even be signaling to somebody. When you're immersed in the Shema prayer, it's you and God. Nobody gets between you and God when you're saying the Shema. And it was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar Chizma says, concerning one who recites Shema and makes allusions with his eyes, or opens and closes his mouth with his lips, or gestures with his fingers, the verse says, and you did not call out to me, O Jacob. That's Isaiah 43:22. By signaling while reciting Shema, he behaves contemptuously toward God. And it is tantamount to not having recited the Shema at all. How then could Rav gesture while reciting the Shema? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. This prohibition to interrupt one's recitation of Shema with a gesture applies in the course of reciting the first paragraph of the Shema, which is more fundamental. That case where Rav gestured was in the course of reciting the second paragraph of the Shema, where gesturing to convey a significant message in a Torah matter is permitted. Normally, you don't interrupt the Shema for mundane matters, but for a Torah matter, okay, you can make a signal during the second paragraph, but during the first paragraph, not even for the purpose of Torah learning or a mitzvah clarification or anything. You don't interrupt. Apropos interruptions in the course of reciting Shema, the Gemara cites a Baraisa in which the sages taught, And this is from the Shema, right? And these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and you shall teach them diligently unto your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. And then it will continue, and you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a symbol before your eyes, and you will inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. But here we're just talking about the part that I read, which is Deuteronomy 6:6 and 6:7. This means that in the course of reciting them, the study of Torah and the recitation of Shema, it is permitted to interrupt to state a significant matter, but not in the course of reciting the Amidah, the standing prayer, the 18 benedictions, which may not be interrupted for any kind of speech. Another interpretation of the verse is, and you shall talk of them, is to emphasize that it is permitted to interrupt Shema to speak these matters of Torah, but not to speak other matters that may lead to levity. Rabbi Acha says, talk of them means one must render them, words of Torah, a permanent fixture and not render them a temporary exercise. Rava said, one who engages in idle chatter without Torah or any particular purpose violates a positive commandment as it is stated, and you shall talk of them, and not of other matters. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, furthermore, one even violates a negative commandment. As it is stated, all these matters are wearisome, no man can ever state them. Ecclesiastes 1:7. The phrase no man can ever state them is understood as a prohibition against engaging in idle chatter. Now, there's a note here from Rav Steinsaltz. The Gemara does not mean that one actually violates a positive and a negative commandment by Torah law when you engage in idle chatter at any time during the day. It is merely seeking a biblical support for the severity of this behavior. And the halacha is, it is inappropriate to engage in idle chatter. Rather, it is preferable to converse in Torah matters, and one should especially avoid idle chatter on Shabbos. So, it's not just, when you're praying, you don't interrupt for idle chatter. The sages would prefer that we don't get involved in idle chatter, period. That's a level of holiness which, you got to be pretty saintly to aspire that you're just not going to get involved in talking about blah, blah, blah. And you can confine everything that you talk about in your life to matters of righteousness and holiness. And you can make a connection to Torah on almost any subject. So you're going to talk in a Torah manner about everything that you talk about, but no idle chatter at all. Okay, even if we can't rise to that level yet, it just shows how important it is to guard our speech. That concludes the discussion of Mishnah number 4. Now we'll open our discussion of Mishnah number 5. We won't complete it because we're near the end of our daf. So I'm near the end of what I'm going to be covering today. If you have questions or comments, get them in there. Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 1. If the high priest sought to sleep at night, this is the night of Yom Kippur, the young priests would snap the middle finger against the thumb before him, and they would say to him every so often, my master, high priest, stand from your bed and chill yourself once on the floor and overcome your drowsiness. And they would engage him in various ways until the time would arrive to slaughter the daily offering. And the Gemara asks, what is the tzerada finger mentioned in the Mishnah? I'm not going to lift my middle finger to you, but when you snap, it's with the middle finger, and they're talking about snapping. And Rav Yehuda said, it is the rival, tzara, of the da, one. Which finger is it? The tzerada is the rival of the thumb. It is the middle finger. Why is the middle finger considered the rival of the thumb? Because the thumb and the forefinger, the index finger, are like a husband and wife. So the middle finger is trying to woo away the index finger, and so the middle finger is a rival of the thumb for the affection of the index finger. It's so cute. And that's why it's called a tzerada finger. The middle finger would be strongly positioned against the thumb, And when one separates them, the finger hits the palm, creating a sound. Rav Huna demonstrated the loud noise that could be achieved by snapping with the middle finger, and the sound traveled throughout Rav's study hall. And the sound created was loud enough to keep the high priest awake on Yom Kippur night. It was taught in the Mishna that they said to him, "My master, high priest, stand from your bed and chill yourself once on the floor and overcome your drowsiness." Rav Yitzchak said that they said to the high priest, "Introduce something new." And the Gemara asks, what is it that they asked him to introduce? They said to him, "Demonstrate how to perform the ceremonial bowing." This was a form of bowing that was difficult to perform and in which the high priest was expert. And the thought was that the exercise would keep him awake. And the Mishnah continues, and this is the last thing I'm going to read today. And they would engage him in different ways until the time to slaughter the daily offering would arrive. It was taught they would not occupy him with a harp or a lyre, because those could not be played on the festival, right? On Yom Kippur, you can't play these instruments. They may not be played on the festival, but they would sing with their mouths. And what would they say? They would say this verse from Psalms 127. I've played it many times at the top of the show. The Shira choir sings such a beautiful version of it. Im Hashem lo yivnei bayis, hi dai 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 dai. Hi da 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 di da 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 da. That verse is, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain upon it. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman keeps vigil in vain. The message to the high priest was that his service must be performed for the sake of heaven, for it to be accepted by God. Otherwise, his efforts would be in vain. That's what I've got for us today. Let me check your comments and questions. Tom Beck asked, could a Cohen also be a sage? Yes. Yes, he could. And there were a few Kohanim who were sages. And I suspect that, like what percentage of the population are Kohanim? Pretty small. And they probably were slightly overrepresented among the sages, since already, the priests are kept close to Torah and are kept close to the divine service. They require an education anyway. They're a little bit closer to the seat of learning, etc. So I don't know exactly how many Kohanim served as sages and members of the Sanhedrin, but definitely there were some. Okay, Nina had to go and pick up one of the kids, so let me scan the comments myself. May one interrupt to warn someone in imminent danger, right? Okay, so may you interrupt your own recitation of the Shema to warn somebody who is in danger? Answer's got to be yes, right? If what we're saying is their life is in danger, right? If they're in danger of getting a summons served to them, then no, right? But as we've seen before, we desecrate Shabbos to save a life, even if there's a small danger, but that it could, even if it's a small risk, but it could lead to a fatality. Absolutely, saving a human life trumps everything. So I would say the answer is yes. Sharon, there's a prayer in the Shachrit, in the morning service, in some traditional prayer books. I'm looking for it as I write, giving acknowledgement to those who do not talk during services. Well, that's good, because I'll tell you that this problem of the people who talk in shul, that's every synagogue wrestles with that. The Orthodox are not exempt from this problem. The ultra-Orthodox are not exempt from this problem. There's just some people in this world who can't button it up. And I've even asked, I've gone to Rabbi Tauber here in LA. When people talk in shul, are you, and you're asked, and you want them to be quiet so that they don't interfere with the davening of the rest of the people. Is that a request as a matter of etiquette or as a matter of halacha? And Rabbi Tauber, who's a very respected dayan, a very respected authority, Torah authority, said, halacha. It's a matter of law that people should not talk in shul in a manner that disturbs everyone else. It's just a big problem in the Jewish world, and we commend everybody who goes into the synagogue to pray and keeps his attention on prayer and doesn't get into idle chatter. What's going on over here? Yosef Shum says, interesting to hear which books the Tanaim thought were the most exciting. I figured Daniel would be one of them, right? I mean, the story of Daniel, the lion's den, etc. That's a gripping story. Chronicles doesn't sound like such an exciting book, but of course it is. Chronicles has all these stories of the kings, and the treachery and deceit and the murders and the action. That's a series of action movies, right? In the book of Chronicles. Job, not exactly a happy book, but definitely one that will keep you awake when, of course, the question of Job is why? Job was a righteous person. Why did he suffer everything that he suffered? Just because, the Satan, the prosecutor, right, the prosecuting angel said to God, well, he's such a righteous person because you've given him everything. You take everything away from him, then let's see if he's a righteous person. Reminds me of the Dan Aykroyd, Eddie Murphy movie, Trading Places. Okay, any other questions? Oh, and Janine says, how did a Sadducee get to be a high priest? Clearly, by not revealing to anyone that he was a Sadducee. He kept that to himself. If they knew he was a Sadducee, they never would have appointed him. And that's why this oath had to be administered, because they just didn't know who had these Sadducee tendencies. And as we've seen, this whole Pharisee-Sadducee conflict, it was not just some kind of intellectual conflict. There were eras where it was, a huge civil strife. There was political power at stake. The Sadducees kind of attached themselves to these corrupt kings and says, you don't have to listen to these Pharisees, these sages, these prophets. You can get prophets not in the late Second Temple period, but you don't have to listen to them. You can kill them. You can get rid of them, And it led to violence, all right? There was a lot more at stake than just sort of Torah interpretation, though that would be enough. So yeah, for a Sadducee to have become high priest, it was because he hid the fact that he was a Sadducee. And it was in light of that calamity that they needed to, adjure the high priest and make sure that they swore not to conduct themselves in a Sadducee-like manner once they went into the sanctuary where no one could see what they were doing. Okay, so that's what I've got for us today. We dedicated today's learning. We had 2 Mishnayos, and all our learning to those holy souls who were gathered last night in Meron, Israel. They came together to celebrate the goodness of the Lord. There was such beautiful singing and joy in that place. And then somehow on the way out, something went wrong. There were initial reports about bleachers collapsing. That was all wrong. It was a question of the crowd being directed in a certain way, and there was just a mistake made. A bunch of people ended up in one area. They were getting suffocated. They kind of tried to break free. The ground was slippery. It was just a whole bunch of circumstances, and the result was 45 people died and many more were injured. So we pray for the healing of everyone who is injured, that they should have a complete healing. And we dedicate today's learning to those of blessed memory, those holy souls of blessed memory who gathered for a holy purpose of joy. May Mashiach come soon, when those holy souls will return and we will all celebrate together. I wish you a good Shabbos.